Hello and welcome to the 29th episode of the Extreme Sports Performance podcast. My name is Ryan Brake, I'm the founder and director of Extreme Sports Performance. In this episode I'm talking to Stuart Barnes. Stuart is the bowling and assistant coach at Somerset County Cricket Club. In this episode I ask him the questions I ask all my guests. Who he is, what he does, where has he come from and what has he done along the way, what are the key moments from his career so far, what are his top areas of interest, what are the most valuable things that he's learnt, who are his top influences, what are his top resources for information, what are his top sports performance exercises and or drills, what are his top pieces of advice in life, exercise and or sport, and finally, where can people find him. As normal, we freestyle in between questions about different interrelated things. Really good to catch up with Barnesy to record this episode. Hope you enjoy it. Here we go. Stuart, welcome to the Extreme Sports Performance podcast. Could you just start by letting everyone know who you are and what you do?
So Stuart Barnes, I am currently bowling coach, assistant coach at Somerset County Cricket Club, where it all started for me in coaching back in 1997. So that's what I'm currently doing at the moment.
And could you just give us a little bit more information of where you started out as a player and how you got to where you are now? Just give us a little bit of synopsis of that journey.
So cricket was in my blood, my brother's blood, since watching our dad play only local club cricket. I was given the opportunity to become a professional back in 1990 with Gloucestershire, and that only lasted for 2 years, which is an interesting story in itself. So after being a professional cricketer, and when that finished, I, like a lot of people do, blame everybody else apart from myself for my opportunity being taken away. I then went back to Barclays Bank, which is where I worked previously. They were kind enough to keep my job open. But during that time, I was kind of just working out what it was that I wanted to do for the next 10, 15 years. However nice Barclays were to me, it wasn't going to be banking, that is for sure. So I used that period to kind of sift through some ideas and work out where my kind of passion lies. At that time, I was still playing club cricket, just local club cricket. And because I played a small amount of professional cricket, we talked a lot. And I actually found that I enjoyed talking about the game, what I'd learned, how I'd learned it, and some possible ideas of how people could improve themselves, just giving them options to maybe try and test to see if it would improve them. And I kind of came to the conclusion, actually, whilst I'm still playing cricket, I enjoy talking about cricket and I enjoy learning about people. I kind of thought, well, okay, let's give this coaching a real good go. And so my first coaching job was in schools. And for 2, maybe 3 years, I was coaching in primary schools, secondary schools. And on reflection, that gave me an amazing coaching foundation in all sorts of ways: language, planning, organization, all that kind of stuff, taking whole classes of 30 kids and things. But it still wasn't kind of scratching my itch, if you see what I mean. There were still things I needed to challenge myself on. And even at that stage, I didn't know what that was. I then became academy director and second team coach back at Gloucestershire, which was an amazing job, working with the most talented young cricketers at Gloucestershire and helping them and moulding them in the hope that they would become professional cricketers. And it was at this time I worked alongside John Bracewell, who's the ex-New Zealand Black Caps cricket coach. And he really became my first mentor, like coaching mentor. And he really challenged me to create some ambition for myself, which was great for me, because then all of a sudden, it became clearer to me that I wanted to challenge myself, because I hadn't played at international level. That was the place I decided I needed to challenge myself. I hadn't got that experience of playing at that level. But how can I learn the tools to coach people who are playing at that level? So once I got that ambition, I then spent a period of time in Bangladesh, which was amazing. Became Surrey bowling coach, then very quickly became assistant head coach, which is where I was fortunate enough to work alongside yourself. And I spent 5 years there. And then I kind of got to a point where I just felt that I'd taken the bowlers there as far as I could take them. And so I pulled away from my contract with a year left to go. And I didn't really know where I was going then. I went into property, set up a business with my wife, Emily. And then after 18 months, I decided now it's people and coaching, not bricks and mortar that I was passionate about. And an opportunity came up at Somerset last year as their one-day specialist bowling coach, which ended pretty well with us winning the final at Lords. And on the back of that, that was my kind of interview, I guess, trial. They offered me a 2-year contract, which started last November. So I've had a bit of a mix of experiences. Some work with the ECB as well, which was really good in all sorts of ways as well. So yeah, that's my journey so far.
Fantastic. Vinny, that's really interesting. Thanks for sharing that. You've recently worked with Ireland as well, didn't you, during the last White Ball series?
Yeah, that was a brilliant opportunity that just kind of presented itself to me. We, as in Somerset, were in the middle of our kind of pre-season post-lockdown, and we were working towards a 3 or 4 weeks leading into our first championship game. And I received a call from Richard Holdsworth, who I used to work with at Gloucestershire, who's the high performance director out in Ireland, to see if I were available. And I thought, you know what, let's ask the question. The pros of taking that opportunity was working at international level, being able to observe and help the Ireland boys and give some local kind of knowledge on the Ageas Bowl and some of the England batters that I knew fairly well, as well as observing how England train, world champions at that level for a reason. So it was really good to observe them from my balcony overlooking the ground, see how they go about their business. The downside, of course, was an important period here at Somerset leading into our first championship game. But thankfully it all worked out and the decision was made. Actually, I would gain quite a lot from being in that environment, which was a real good environment and a good challenge for me.
Did you notice any obvious differences between the athletes performing at that international level compared to the athletes working at that county level?
The obvious one for me was the skill levels. Now, Ireland are at a different level to England. They're very talented and they are skillful. Training sessions with them was a real mix of how can we enhance the skills that you already have and make them more consistent, and balancing that with, have you thought about this skill? So it was a real kind of mix and a balancing act, because it was only a 19-day trip and it was what I would call a performance trip. They were there to win some matches against England, which was a really important series to gain some World Cup qualification points. So the difference with working with Ireland was getting that mix right between, how can we make your super skill even better? And have you thought about this skill, which I think is relevant on this ground against these batters? I mean, you're looking at the way that England went about their business, strong stroke makers, lots of power throughout their batting order, and extremely skillful bowlers who have exposure of playing some kind of high-end tournaments around the world. So they have exposure of playing with and against some of the best cricketers in the world. Ireland don't have that luxury. So it was a real balance and lots of observations of how England are world champions at the moment, together with helping, coaching, assisting the Ireland boys perform well, which and we ended up with a win in the last game, which was a great experience.
Fantastic. I think no matter what performance environment you're in, whatever sport, I think if you've not been in that environment previously, you're always going to learn something. And it's just such valuable experience to have. So I can completely relate to that. So you may have already alluded to this previously, but what would you say your key moments have been from your career so far, and how would you say those have shaped you into the type of coach you are now?
Well, undoubtedly for me, one of the key moments was the moment I looked at myself in the mirror and took responsibility for what I call now my failed professional career. It actually took me a few years because I was blaming all sorts of things: the coaches, the information I was given, getting ill on a pre-season trip, which meant that I was underweight for the whole of the second year, which ended up being my last year. But actually, at the end of the day, I had nobody to blame but myself, and so I consider that as a massive moment in my life, really, in eventually getting to a point where actually this is stupid. I didn't work hard enough. I didn't listen enough. I didn't ask enough questions about how I can improve. I didn't spend enough time with people that were already skilled and good at what I wanted to become good at. I did rely on my talent. I was lazy. I didn't work hard enough. I did make poor choices around nutrition and etc. etc. And that moment for me, I came away, right, I'll never make that same mistake again. And yeah, that just brought real clarity. And that is a philosophy and some learnings that is at the core of my own coaching when I'm coaching young players. So that's the first one. The second one, when I started spending time with what I consider good coaches who understand people, who challenge, I might have noticed coaches challenge players in a certain way, sometimes quite harshly, but then still have the trust of the player to actually have those one-to-one times and completely open up to the coach and be vulnerable. And actually the coaches being vulnerable with the players as well. When I started associating myself and spending time with John Bracewell, with Graham Ford, with Kevin Shine, three mentors that I consider having an integral part in who I am today and the journey I've been on, things started to happen. They didn't change me massively, but they kind of tweaked the way that I saw the world and tweaked the way that I didn't copy them, but you kind of learn traits of successful people and you make them your own. And one of the things that I've received some feedback on that has undoubtedly made me a better coach, which all three of those coaches, those mentors use, was less is more. So I used to be busy trying to impress people with my knowledge and almost desperate to make an impact. And I was saying far too much. And undoubtedly less is more has made me a better coach. And that is with other people, but those three mentors definitely taught me that. And the third key moment, again, I alluded to this earlier on, was John Bracewell challenged me to have an ambition. And I went away from that thinking, well, I can either have a cushy job working at a first-class county and just doing what it is I'm doing today for the next 20 years, or I can look back on my career and say, do you know what, I've put myself in opportunities with different experiences, with different people, and learning different skills and ways to communicate with people. And so as soon as I set my long-term goal, and I really narrowed it down to be an international bowling coach, of which there aren't that many, every decision I made from that time took me, in my mind, a step closer to achieving that goal. And again, when I kept reminding myself of that goal, that long-term goal, and again, things started to happen. I got opportunities to work with the England Lions, go away on fast bowling camps to India, working with Dennis Lilly, and visiting all sorts of places in the world. So those three: taking responsibility for my career, having good mentors, spending time with good people, and setting clear goals and reminding myself of that goal and my other goals on a daily basis undoubtedly have formed where I am now.
Fantastic. Really good answers. I can personally relate to all of those myself as well. And I think the key thing for me that I've noticed needed to be improved from when I met you to now, working with multiple different sports since we last worked together, was communication. And for me, like that's a kind of a foundation skill that has really helped me become better at what I do. How important would you say that is, having good communication skills in what you do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, it's huge. So the way that I get around what I believe is important communication is, right, what's my job? So today we had training today. My job was to ensure that all the bowlers got something from today's practice. So the way I do that is to communicate with the bowlers, right, what is it that you want from today? What does that look like? What do you need from me? I then also ensure that I communicate with the S&C coach and anything relevant from the physio, because bowlers get injured. So in order for me to do my job, there are some real key relationships that and it's literally a passing question, a passing comment, just to make sure that I've got all the relevant information. So yeah, working out who my key relationships are, so I've got all the information I need to make sure that the bowlers are on track, on course, and ready for our assault on Warwickshire, which starts on Saturday. So yeah, communication, and you would know this. I mean, we communicated really well. And I've always worked very closely with S&C coaches because bowling is such a physical skill. I've always worked very closely with S&C coaches because force gets absorbed by muscle much more efficiently than bone, and there's lots of bony injuries with bowlers, and so ensuring that the bowlers are reflecting their kind of skills in the gym is really important. So yeah, there's a key relationship there.
I think that quite often or not, the athletes we work with, often already have the answer. You just got to try and get it out of them in an honest and obvious way. That's comes back to what you said before about trying to keep things simple. Because if there's overcomplication involved, I think they struggle to find that answer or to really kind of see what it is that they need to improve on. So yeah, I really like that approach. It sounds awesome.
Just to add to that, it's really interesting when performers aren't performing very well. I absolutely agree with you that in most cases they do have all the answers. There are certain basics in any sport that I think that if they are in place, there's a good chance there is some form of consistency. But for some reason, players come away from those, for whatever reason, injuries, a poor performance, doubts, belief, confidence, or whatever, and they start searching for something that's not actually there. So I agree. Most of the answers the performance already have, and it's not like they forget them, but they kind of, I'm not sure how much patience there is because they're always searching for that bit of gold dust that's not really there.
I find that experience tends to make a big difference there of the athlete. The older athletes who've been around the block, been involved in what they do for a longer period of time, are a lot more clear on what it is they need to do. I find that sometimes younger athletes can get a bit overexcited or confused because they're not quite on at that same level, or have gone through those systems and processes as often or successfully, or even unsuccessfully, which sometimes makes the lessons you learn even more apparent and realistic to put into practice and improve.
Yeah, I agree. So I reckon experience gives you the opportunity to tap into players talk a lot about being in the zone and flow, where it just feels easy and they're executing the skill ridiculously well, but it's almost effortless. And looking back on the people that I've worked with, experience gives those players the opportunity to tap into that far quicker than less experienced players, because they haven't kind of done that foundational work for as long as they need to. So for instance, Kevin Peterson is a classic. So he wouldn't hit many balls, but the first time he comes back in, he might hit quite a lot of balls, but it doesn't take him very many balls to hit before he gets into good positions. His hands are working really well. His back face is going through the ball. Whereas other players who are less experienced, and obviously he's an absolute genius, it takes them a bit longer, but they get frustrated because they can't get to that place. So yeah, it's interesting.
I also noticed that with Kev as well, when he was with us at Surrey for a short period of time, he knew exactly what it was he needed to do in the gym. It was more just supporting him through that process rather than kind of telling him or suggesting things. And I think that's a true reflection or a true example of someone who really is a master of their skill. So you may have already covered some of these topics or answers previously, but what would you say, not necessarily from a cricket point of view, but from psychological, physiological, any, I suppose, sports science related topics, would you say your top areas of interest are at the moment alongside your cricket coaching specific?
Undoubtedly people, trying to understand people and how they see the world, what affects behaviours, what impacts on performance, how the brain works. So I'm currently listening to Jim Quick's book, Limitless, which is all about, actually we don't use much of the brain at all, but if we did better, then we would know the answers to most things in terms of habits, behaviors. This is what I want. This is the journey I need to go on in order to get it. Limiting beliefs. And what I'm fascinated by at the moment is that, when we're born, we don't have any fears at all. And yet it does depend on our early upbringing about what we believe we can and can't do. And even in my own life, some people used to kind of laugh at me. You want to be an international coach? You'd ever played at international level, sort of thing. And if you listen to these sort of people, they kind of just pat you down on the head, kind of keep you down there, sort of thing. But it is possible to overcome limiting beliefs. And having taken an NLP master practitioner course, some of which I've used extensively, particularly language and observing behaviors. So to answer your question, definitely people, and in particular, invariably there is almost always a change of behavior just prior to a dip in performance. That fascinated me on the course that I took. So behaviors, by that I mean how a player comes in on a morning. Are they normally jovial? Are they? Do they say a lot? What are they wearing? How do they prep? What are they eating? All sorts of things, and body language and stuff. So I've kind of gotten into the habit massively of taking in all of this information, particularly when players are performing well, and something is not quite in place just before a dip in performance or an injury, which absolutely fascinated me. And it's rung true. So people definitely, and I guess on a similar kind of train of thought, challenging what they believe their best performance is. So cricket is very stats based. So you end your career with averages, strike rates, higher scores, most wickets in a match, all that kind of stuff. And challenging in a non-threatening way. Well, what do you need? What one thing could you change or consider changing in order to improve those numbers? Because numbers, when you're gone, numbers are all that people are going to know. So how are you going to bat an extra 20 balls per innings? how can you bowl more balls in a better area than you have done so far? So challenging the kind of, what some people accept is okay, and say, no, what if better is possible? What would that look like? So again, that's a people thing. And the other area of interest that I've gotten into, I was rubbish at reading at school, and have been for years, but I've really gotten into reading books, and I'll buy a book, and if it hasn't grabbed me within 50 pages, I'll put it down. But if it does grab me, then actually, the habit of reading and learning, and because growing myself and developing myself into a better coach is really important to me as well, and the different kind of aspects of it. So learning, book reading is the third area of interest. Yeah, definitely.
Any recent books you've read that you recommend?
Well, there's a book that I'm rereading, which is called Hunger in Paradise, which is all about what business is. It's not necessarily sport related, although there are some sport examples in there. When somebody is successful, what happens to the organizations that remain successful, and what happens when a business tastes success and then rests and just replicates that year again when everyone else is getting better, and all of a sudden they go down. So Nokia is an absolute classic, and that's one of the examples in the book. That they 20 odd years ago were they were the Apple of the time, but they rested on their success and allowed the forward thinking company like Apple to overtake them, and now Nokia are struggling massively. So Hunger in Paradise is a book, and I write all over my books, so I'm highlighting them and writing notes and stuff like this. So we won the Lord's final last year, and I want to make sure we don't make the same mistakes again. So it's just gentle reminders. How can we get better? How can we keep evolving? And it's just little tweaks. That's all it is. Because you're either getting better or you're getting worse. You can't stay the same.
Habit formation for me is a key interest at the moment. So it's funny you should mention that, but that shapes ultimately everything I do with the people I work with. And it fascinates me how little people know about it. So that's always the first thing that I'd approach, usually, whether it's a very young athlete who's not really had much experience in their sport, or whether it's someone who's been playing at the highest level for years. Just observing those habits, and as you said before, trying to look into a little bit more detail about how you can improve them, for me, is key. I'll make sure I put that book in the show notes at the end of the show, so you can access it. And
I'll send you through. Rasmus Ankerson, Hunger in Paradise.
Cool.
How to save success from failure. Yeah.
So, based on everything that you've experienced in your life, all the people you've met, all the places you've been, all the things you've done, what would you say the most valuable things are that you've learned?
Well, I reckon success leaves clues. And one of the things that I have learned, and it's not necessarily that I've been involved in that success, but just through observations of people who may have beaten us in key matches and things, is there's always more to give. Now, there's another book, Can't Hurt Me, by David Goggins. Now, he's an absolute beast. I think you'd enjoy his book. I listened to his Audible. He was overweight, not fit, nutrition was not good, and yet he then decided, he looked at himself in the mirror and he said, right, I'm going to enter this race. And the race was running 100 miles within 24 hours. And he did it. And he ended up with broken feet, shins, knees, all sorts of stuff. But he would not sit down until he'd completed it. And he's since gone on and raised millions of dollars for military organizations and things. But he's got this rule, which really interests me. He says, when you think you're done and there's nothing left, actually, you're only operating at 40%. And I look back and I think, actually, how much more is there to give? So I'm a massive believer. One of the things I've learned, there's always more to give. When you think you've had enough, there's always more to give. Whether you're on a bike, doing a marathon, whatever it is, you can convince your brain and just keep going and push harder and harder. The second one is surrounding myself with good people. And it's only when I've started working with mentors and actually spending time with what I believe are successful people. And I'm not talking in terms of money, cars, watches, not in the material stuff. I'm not interested in that. I am interested in terms of successful people. You know, these people tend to outperform their own performance. You know, they're really pushing the boundaries, and they're happy and they're content, and they've got the balance right, and they've got healthy habits and all this kind of stuff. So surrounding myself with good people. And there's a quote which a business person I listened to, I've never met him, but Dan Pena, who's an interesting guy. Show me your friends, I'll show you your future, which is something that has just kind of stuck with me. And he reckons in his world, he believes that, you know, the 5 people you spend the most time with, you become the average of those 5 people. Now, whether that's true or not, it really gets you thinking about where you're spending your time and the people you're spending your time with. And the third really valuable thing that I've learned, which I've kind of already covered, is by having good mentors. And I cannot stress the importance of having a good mentor who's worldly, who is calm, who listens. And I always think a good mentor doesn't necessarily give you the answers all the time. In fact, a good mentor and a good coach, I think, in a conversation says the least amount of things. They tease conversation out of the person in front of them and get them talking, because I guess on the lines of what you mentioned earlier on, they've got all the answers anyway. Yeah, so those are the 3 things I've learned that spring to mind immediately anyway.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again for sharing that. It's really interesting. With regards to your mentors, would you say they had any similar characteristics at all, or did they all operate in the same way?
The thing that they all had in common was that they challenged me. I believe a good mentor challenges you to become better. Now, who knows what might have happened if I'd had a good mentor when I was a professional player, and completely shake up the comfortable world that I was in. But I think, or I believe, a good mentor just not literally, but kind of shakes your shoulders and shakes you around and gets you thinking about the world as you see it, the world as it could be, and not only challenges, but then supports that athlete to the next kind of, to close that door and open a new door. Because again, you're either you're getting better or you're getting worse. So challenge is definitely the thing that the mentors that I've worked with have all had in common.
I think one of the things you just said there about comfort, for me, I can really relate to, because I've started to have most successes in my career with my business, with athletes or people I've worked with, when I've been extremely comfortable being uncomfortable. Whereas I know lots of people who it's just nature's instinct to be comfortable being comfortable. Personally, I just don't think you can succeed or perform. You can survive, but I don't think you can succeed or perform at the highest level until you can do that. And I think that's true in any environment, not necessarily in sport, but in business as well.
Do you reckon being uncomfortable is a habit?
I think it can become more of a habit, but I do think ultimately it's more of a trait, to be honest. It's very interdependent, and I don't think it's until maybe you've had some failures or bad days or regrets that you start to look at it differently.
Yeah.
And that's what happened for me. Like, a key moment in my life when I was just naive to how I was operating and everything going on around me. And it took a few moments like that to really wake me up. It took a few of my mentors to, ruffle my feathers to make me realise that. Very interesting subject for me. I could talk about that forever. Last few questions, mate, because I've said I won't promise I wouldn't keep you for more than an hour. What would you say your top resources for new information are if you need to find something out that you're not too sure about?
So I'm always on the lookout for book recommendations. So I get all sorts of kind of recommendations, but particularly around performance, particularly around anything kind of brain-based, because I'm really interested in that. Anything around coaching language. I do relax as well. I do read fiction and stuff as well, but definitely books. I'm always listening on the lookout for book recommendations, and undoubtedly conversations with people. So I really enjoy speaking with people, and if nothing else, lockdown taught me I'm actually having more conversations with people I don't know, because from a social distance, of course, I'm there having conversations with the neighbours, with people who are walking on the opposite side of the road and thanking them. And actually, it takes nothing just to ask them what they're doing, where you're from. Okay, that's interesting. How did you get into that? So lockdown reinforced the importance of speaking with people, because that is an unlimited resource of information. And we're social animals. So undoubtedly that as well, and podcasts. So I've got I spend quite a lot of time in the car, so there's audible books, but actually when I want something a little bit less heavy than listening to a book for kind of 2 hours, I'll just listen to a kind of half hour, 45-minute podcast. Yourself, really enjoy listening to yours, and the guests you've had on there. Ed Milet is one that I listen to quite a lot. Short, punchy, packed with information. So those three.
Fantastic. It's funny you should mention talking to the neighbours or talking to strangers, because I was recently listening to a podcast where they say that there's a direct link between happiness and speaking to people you don't know, and the more that you do it, it can adjust your brain chemistry in a certain way over time that can actually make you happier day to day. So it's something they've tried to implement into, particularly in basketball players in the NBA. So
right.
It's quite a fascinating area, that. So keep it up, because it's a healthy thing to do, especially these times when people might not be feeling themselves or a little bit stressed and down about everything.
Exactly.
So we've alluded to strength conditioning for fast bowling. And obviously, we've spent a lot of time together talking about this, discussing this, watching players in the gym, watching players out in the nets, on the wicket. What would you say, in your experience, your top sports performance exercises and drills are for improving fast bowling?
Well, there is a technique, and there's a safer technique for fast bowling, and there are some positions that are more unsafe. So there is a big emphasis on technique, and the ideal kind of journey somebody goes on is the basic technique of a safe, repeatable action is taught and learned at a young age, and that stays with them. And all I do when they get to kind of professional level, we start talking about the craft. We start talking about what deliveries and when to get to put pressure on this batter, angles on the crease, seam positions, etc., etc. Now that doesn't always happen because bad habits can creep in, but there's definitely an element of technique that is really important. I really enjoy, as I discussed earlier on, having discussions with S&C coaches and trying to get creative in what loading somebody in the gym could look like that is relevant to fast bowling shape, because players will then make the link between the skill and the gym, and it's a far easier sell to get in the gym. You need to do this, you need to squat because there's an element of a squat in a bowling action. This is where it is. So I show them their action. That's where you're squatting, albeit not deep squat, but that's where you're squatting. So making that link with their exercise in the gym is really important. Anything to do with power, because I'm all about recruiting as many fast twitch fibers as possible. And the last bit really for me is running technique. I'm still amazed how many cricketers get to the top end that don't, in my eyes, seem to have a fluid, bouncy, efficient running technique.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably something that, again, needs to be taught at a young level, and whether that's a reflection of young children's and young adults' lifestyles at the moment, I don't know. But it's probably something that needs to be taught at that level and continue to be taught throughout, because it's that important. Athletes playing cricket are expected to do things for faster, for longer, hit the ball farther, bowl the ball faster, ground contact, all sorts of stuff. So yeah, so I would say that the technique of bowling, definitely making the link with the gym and running techniques.
I think ultimately, like when it comes down to sports performance, I think it's trying to and make sure there is a link between their skill and how to enhance or improve that skill physically.
Yeah.
And if you can mirror the two, the difference between the skill and what it might look at in a strength conditioning environment, then the buy-in, as you said, will be a lot greater. I was listening to a podcast with Eddie Jones the other day, and he said that that's his philosophy with England rugby. That's what they try and do as much as possible, especially with the forwards, who obviously exposed to so much more collision, is trying to get that link as close and as effective as possible. And the other thing I just wanted to add to that point is quite a lot of the young cricket players I work with at the moment are between 15 and 18 years old, and they're all multi-sport athletes. They're all seasonal athletes, so they'll play rugby, football, athletics, among other things, all year round, and then cricket in the summer. And the fast bowlers particularly, the most successful ones are the ones who are most fluid, the ones who leak least energy when they run in. And funnily enough, they're the ones with no or little injuries. So it all adds up and relates to itself.
There's no coincidence. Yeah, there's no coincidence. And I remember me and you having, deep and meaningful conversations and constructive conversations, analysing the bowlers at Surrey. So yeah, there's the less energy leaks as possible for fast bowling. You can use as much energy as you can then up into the ball. That's where I want to lead towards. Yeah.
I think it also comes down to the key point really that you again mentioned earlier is robustness. Really, the amount of times they have to repeat that skill, and then whether it's a school level or it's a club level or a county level or even an international level, that volume of repetitions just exponentially increases. So being robust to those force tolerances is crucial.
There's a lot that goes into that, because in order to, I would like the fast bowlers on any team that I'm coach at to be the fittest, the strongest, the most powerful. Yet what goes back into that is their nutrition habits, their drinking habits, their recovery habits, their sleep habits. We haven't even touched on sleep, which we both know is really, really important in terms of recover. And the cricket season is absolutely relentless. So, you could spend all day in the fields and you get home late at night. The tendency can be to eat less healthy, but quickly, which then disrupts your sleep and all sorts of stuff.
I think we've just skimmed the surface really with a lot of these things we discussed, but I could talk about it forever. I mean, there's just so many things that go into it. Thank you very much for your time. It's been great having you on the show. I really appreciate your insights and your honesty with everything. If people wanted to get in touch with you and ask you maybe some follow-up questions, what's the best way they can do that?
I'm not massive on social media, but I am on it. So Instagram, Stuart N. Barnes, same for Twitter, Stuart Barnes on Facebook. I've recently set up a website where I invite people to send me their bowling actions to analyse. And the website is www.stuartbarnescricketcoaching.com. But yeah, I'm happy to hear from anybody who may need me to drill down in any of the areas that we've covered. I've really enjoyed it.
Brilliant. Well, I'll make sure that all the links that you've mentioned and all those handles you've just mentioned go into the show notes, so anyone listening can click directly onto those. But thanks again, and all the best for the rest of the season, and hope to catch up soon.
Thanks, Ryan. It's been a pleasure, mate.
Thanks for listening to the 29th episode. We hope you enjoyed the show. Please leave us a rating and or review on whichever platform you're listening on. Please check out our website, www.extremesportsperformance.com. On our media page we have weekly blogs that include Thought of the Week, Exercise of the Week, Recipe of the Week and Training Song of the Week. Each month's collection gets compiled into our monthly newsletter along with company service and store updates. You can sign up for free to receive this via our subscribe page. Our online store consists of training programs, online and in-person coaching, nutrition plans, toolbox and interactive training systems. Please follow us on our social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter and YouTube. Links to these can be found at the bottom of every page on our website or via any search engine. That's all for now. Until next time, take care.